Hello minders, welcome back to the Mind Watercolor. We got a whole lot of I'll say a whole lot of granulating going on here today. Granulating colors, granulation, or also known as sedimentary colors. There seems to be a lot of confusion out there, misconceptions about granulation, so we're going to talk about what it is first. I'm going to get into a little visual aid here, a little science diagram, okay? Here's your paper. In any watercolor wash, what you have is pigment that's ground up and it's suspended in the wash. As you add more water to a wash that has sedimentary colors or granulating colors, they tend to settle out quicker, so they're all like heading down to the bottom because they're heavy. Non-granulating colors don't tend to do that. They settle out more evenly and over greater space, and they don't separate from the water the way these do. A lot of things affect granulation. It can be the brand, it can be the color or the pigment used. Even among granulating pigments, there are some granulating colors that granulate more, some that granulate less. And as you're laying down washes and painting, granulation is also affected by the amount of water that you use. And I'll show you a couple demos, but this is all that's happening. So get a piece of smooth Bristol board. It may not be the ideal thing to paint on, but it will show granularity very well. And I'm going to get an ultramarine blue. Ultramarine is one of the chief granulating colors. Inexperienced beginners a lot of times think they have defective colors when they get granular colors. And as a matter of fact, cheaper paints tend to granulate a lot less because they don't use as much pigment. And they'll use thickeners and expanders, you know, something designed to expand the paint so they don't have to use as much pigment. You need a lot of pigment, and then you have to add a lot of water. And you can see where I first added this, I can already tell I'm going to get a glare here, sorry. You can already see it settling out in places. One of the ways I've found to really force granulation is add pigment, then add a lot of water, and go back in and just in places and charge heavy doses of pigment. And if it's a smooth surface like this Bristol board, you'll see the granulation. It's prized. It's prized among a lot of, especially landscape painters that like texture. But you know, those that want it are like, how do I make it happen? And those who don't want it is, how do I make it stop? Okay, we're going to get into that. I'm going to give you a few pointers. All right, there's the Payne's Gray. I'm going to let that dry. I'm going to come in here and add a mixture of red iron oxide and sepia. They're both granulating. You can even see them start to settle out. You swirl it around. It just looks like somebody threw sand in your painting. I'm going to put one more down here. Prussian blue. Prussian blue tends to granulate quite a bit. You know, particularly where paint starts to puddle in places and it's got a lot of pigment in it. As it dries, you'll start to see those granulation patterns come out. Okay, these have had a chance to dry and I've zoomed way in. And you can pretty clearly see the granulation pattern here in this ultramarine blue. This is Payne's Gray. You can really clearly see granulation patterns there. Red iron oxide and sepia mixture didn't granulate as much. You can still see some. A little there, quite a bit there. There's some out on the edge. It really dispersed the pigment well there, and a lot of it just depends. There's so much that can affect granulation, but a lot of it just depends how evenly an area is wet and how evenly it dries. Here's Prussian blue. Granulates a lot. You can see where I have a little bit of a back run. But you can see the granulation up next to that back run. And you can even see in here, it looks very textury. That's all a result of granulation. Up in here too. You can tell what colors are granulating just by looking at how they dry on your palette. Because your palette is just a really smooth surface. I mean, look at this ultramarine violet here. Really neat granulations in there. And of course, ultramarine blue, which always granulates a lot. So just look on your palette sometime. So what do you do if you don't want something to granulate? A normal granulating color. Well, this is ultramarine blue, and what I've done here is I've used cold press paper. You can see the texture of the paper coming through. Cold press is a little rougher texture than a hot press, but what happens is that texture tends, and especially if it's a good paper like Arches, 100% cotton paper, you get nice even wetness and you get a lot of even dispersion of the pigment. So that's one way. Use a high quality cotton paper and use a cold press paper. You're not going to see quite as much granulation. Again, it depends on how much moisture you put down and how varied the moisture is. In other words, one area dries while the other stays wet. A lot of pigment, a lot of water, a lot of flowy kind of passages will cause it to granulate more. So what if you want to make colors that don't granulate? Can you do that? Yes, you can. Winsor Newton has this stuff here called granulation medium. And if you're dealing with a non-granulating color, you can add this to the colors. And really the effect is quite dramatic. Indian yellow and some scarlet pyrrole, which together kind of make a peachy color. Now I put some of that granulation medium in here, and they say that if you use it right out of the bottle, you get the most dramatic effect. And I have tested this, so it's true. I really don't think you need to use it straight out of the bottle. So this is just wet with water. And now I'm just dipping my brush into the medium and brushing over that. I'm going to go back to my palette and get a little bit of extra pigment. Scarlet pyrrole. Let's put a little bit of Indian yellow down here. Alright, so here's the granulating medium after it's dried. You can see those effects are very dramatic. And I didn't even use it full strength out of the bottle, so that's something that really works. I don't know how it works, but somehow I think it clumps with the particles and it makes them settle out even quicker. So if you're interested in intentional granulating, that's a great way to go because you give a lot more control that way. And you can experiment with how much granulation you want to add to your colors. Now, be careful because it ends up on your palette. And I did, as I was experimenting with this, I did end up getting it in some other colors. And you may end up with granulation medium where you don't want it. So my recommendation is maybe mix your granulating colors, the colors that you put granulating medium with, maybe mix those on a separate little palette. But something else I wanted to show you was this Daniel Smith Primatech line. Daniel Smith has got a whole line of paints that are made out of naturally occurring pigments, and some of them even ground from fine gemstones. The reason I'm showing you this is because a lot of those are known to be very granulating and sedimentary, and I did some experimenting. I did a lot of painting and then loosening up and repainting, and just to see if I could make them granulate. You can see this one here is quite dramatic. That's hematite. I do get granulation in all the others, but not quite as much. There's actually, in this is amethyst. I actually get a kind of a shimmery, glittery quality in that, an iridescence. But I can see a little bit of granulation in each of these. So if you're a granulation fan, check into the Daniel Smith Primatex. They make several actually, and you can sample them by buying this little set. All very earthy colors. None of them are really very intense, but really kind of neat to play with. Go out and check your own colors, see which ones are granulating, and play with that a little bit. A lot of times, if you use artist grade paints like I do with M. Graham, you can get a color chart. Not a local supplier, you can go online and get it, and they usually will tell you if it's a granulating pigment or not. So that's helpful to have. Thanks everyone, appreciate it. If you enjoyed this, hope you give me a thumbs up, subscribe. Thanks to all my Patreon supporters. You guys are my sponsor. You make this possible. And we'll see you next time, everyone.